I never expected building a small wooden bridge on my own property would spark an entire neighborhood war. But then again, living on the edge of Briarwood Estates meant that every little decision I made seemed to draw the attention and the wrath of the Homeowners Association. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I finally completed the bridge. My father had always dreamed of connecting the tiny creek that ran through our property, and after months of planning, permits, and weekends spent hammering and measuring, the bridge stood sturdy, simple, and functional. I stepped back to admire my work. The planks were perfectly aligned. The handrails were smooth. The smell of fresh timber mixed with the earthy scent of the creek below. It was perfect. I didn't realize how perfect it would look to Karen Thompson, the self-appointed watchdog of the HOA. I first saw her walking briskly up the dirt road, clipboard in hand, the very picture of suburban fury. She wore her usual floral blouse and khakis, a look she perfected for dramatic confrontations. I could see her frown intensify as she approached. "David, what is this?" she demanded, her voice loud enough for the entire block to hear. I squinted at her, hands on my hips. "This, Karen, is a bridge on my property. What's the problem?" Her jaw tightened. The HOA rules clearly state that no structure can be built within 50 feet of the creek without prior approval. "You should have submitted a request." "I did everything legally," I said, already feeling my patience fray. "Permits, surveys, inspections. This is my land." She shook her head violently. "We're going to fine you $350. I laughed, unable to hide it. $350? For building a bridge on my own property? "Karen, I think you need to check your HOA handbook." That's when the drama began. Karen stormed off to the HOA president, Mr. Larkin, an older man who usually nodded at her every suggestion without question. By noon, the official warning letter was pinned to my mailbox, complete with the outrageous fine. But I didn't panic. I had anticipated resistance from the HOA. This wasn't my first run-in with overzealous neighbors or bureaucratic rules. Instead, I called my lawyer, Mrs. Patel, a sharp-minded woman with a reputation for dismantling HOA overreach. She reviewed the documents I had: permits, land deeds, inspection approvals, and a detailed survey showing that the bridge was entirely on my property. "They don't have a case," she said calmly. "They can try to intimidate you, but legally, you're untouchable. This is all yours, David." With her advice in mind, I decided to handle the situation strategically. I didn't want to escalate immediately. Instead, I planned to let Karen and the HOA dig their own hole deeper. The next morning, I noticed a small crowd had gathered at the end of my driveway. Word travels fast in Briarwood Estates, and apparently, everyone was eager to see the bridge that had caused such an uproar. Karen was there too, pacing, fuming, muttering into her cell phone. "This is unacceptable," she snapped, waving at the crowd for effect. "We cannot allow these rogue structures in our community." Neighbors murmured among themselves. Some shook their heads, looking uneasy at Karen's overreaction. A few whispered supportively to me, offering polite nods and smiles. I appreciated the subtle solidarity. I stepped onto the bridge, arms crossed, projecting calm authority. "Good morning, everyone. I built this bridge for safety and convenience on my own property. It complies with all regulations and does not violate any HOA rules. That is all." Karen's face flushed red. "You can't just decide what rules apply to you." "Actually, Karen," I said, lowering my voice but letting it carry just enough for the neighbors to hear, "this bridge is fully legal, and I have all the documentation to prove it. The $350 fine is unenforceable." A few neighbors gasped softly. Karen sputtered, looking around for backup, but the only response was silence and curious eyes on her. By the end of the week, the HOA had sent multiple letters demanding payment. Each one was more aggressive than the last, accusing me of disregarding community standards and creating safety hazards. I decided it was time to escalate, but on my terms. I arranged for a neighborhood meeting at the local community hall. Invitations went to every HOA member, Karen, and a handful of neutral neighbors who had seen both sides of the story. The room was packed. Karen arrived with her usual dramatics, fanning herself as if the room were unbearably hot. Mr. Larkin followed, shuffling papers nervously, clearly uncomfortable. I had brought Mrs. Patel as my legal support. "We are here to discuss the fine for the unauthorized bridge," Karen began, her tone dripping with authority. Mrs. Patel interrupted politely, but firmly. Before we discuss anything, let's review the facts. The bridge is on Mr. David's property. It has all necessary permits and approvals. It does not violate HOA regulations because it is outside the 50-foot restricted zone. Therefore, the $350 fine is invalid. The room fell silent. Karen blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to formulate a response. But none came. I decided to push a little further. If the HOA continues to harass me, I will have no choice but to pursue reimbursement for legal fees and public acknowledgement that this fine was unjust. I believe the neighbors have a right to see how their community is being mismanaged. Some murmurs of agreement filled the room. Even Mr. Larkin shifted in his seat uncomfortably. Karen left the meeting red-faced and muttering threats under her breath, but the tide had already turned. Neighbors who had previously hesitated to speak now whispered supportive words, expressing their relief that someone had finally stood up to the HOA tyranny. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes. The HOA was quieter, less aggressive in emails, and Karen's overt patrols seemed to diminish. While she still watched from a distance, her influence over the neighborhood appeared weaker. But I knew this wasn't over. HOA battles rarely end quickly, and Karen had a knack for persistence. Every day, I inspected the bridge, ensuring it remained in perfect condition, a silent symbol of my stand for fairness and legal rights. And so, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. The creek flowed, the bridge remained sturdy, and my weekends returned to peaceful woodworking and quiet reflection. But in Briarwood Estates, peace was always temporary. Because somewhere in the background, Karen was undoubtedly plotting her next move. And when she did, I would be ready. Weeks passed after the neighborhood meeting, and Briarwood Estates had not seen a day without whispers about the bridge. Karen had retreated temporarily, but I could sense the tension every time I walked outside. Her eyes always followed, her frown sharper than ever, even when she pretended to be doing something mundane. I was tending to my garden one Saturday when I noticed the HOA had left another letter pinned to the community bulletin board. The handwriting was formal, stern, almost theatrical. I unfolded it carefully. It demanded an immediate appeal hearing, citing community disruption caused by the bridge. I smirked. They still didn't get it. Determined not to let this go unnoticed, I called Mrs. Patel. She recommended documenting everything meticulously: emails, letters, photos, and even neighbors' testimonies. The day of the hearing, I arrived early, the bridge on my mind like a quiet shield behind me. Karen was already there, pacing like a caged animal, muttering over her phone to some unfortunate HOA member who had to listen to her complaints. She didn't see me approaching. I let her stew. The hearing room was stuffy and smelled of old paper and nervous energy. The HOA board members sat at a long table, including Mr. Larkin, who avoided eye contact with me, his usual composure shaken. Karen planted herself in front of the room, arms folded, looking as though she were the judge, jury, and executioner all at once. "We are here to address the unauthorized construction of a bridge that is disrupting the community," she began, her voice dripping with performative authority. I cleared my throat. "Good morning. I have all the proper permits and approvals for the bridge. I have land deeds, surveys, and inspections. The bridge is entirely on my property. I believe this hearing is unnecessary." Karen's face turned a shade of red that was almost comical, but her anger was palpable. She whispered something to one of the board members, who frowned and glanced at me nervously. "The issue is about community safety and visual consistency," Karen insisted. "This bridge does not conform to HOA standards and sets a dangerous precedent." Mrs. Patel stood, placing a folder of documents on the table. "These standards only apply to areas under HOA jurisdiction. Mr. David's property is outside the restricted zone. This bridge does not violate any regulation. The HOA has no authority to fine or intimidate him." A tense silence filled the room. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, and then tried another tactic. "Even if it is on his property, it creates a distraction and encourages other homeowners to ignore the rules," she said, as if reciting lines from a poorly rehearsed script. "If following the law and using one's property responsibly is a distraction," I replied calmly, "then perhaps we need to revisit what rules truly matter in this community." Some neighbors who had attended the hearing nodded subtly. Karen's frustration was evident. She could feel her authority slipping, and she hated it. Over the next week, her tactics escalated. I received multiple emails accusing me of trespassing on HOA property, a claim that was patently false. Then, I noticed flyers posted at my driveway, warning visitors that the area was allegedly unsafe due to the bridge. One of the notes wasn't signed, but the handwriting was unmistakably Karen's. Instead of panicking, I started documenting everything. I took photos of the flyers, recorded emails, and even spoke with neighbors who had witnessed Karen placing them. They were nervous at first, but agreed to provide statements if necessary. One evening, while checking the bridge under the golden sunset, I noticed Karen on the far end of the street, holding her phone and gesturing wildly. She was recording something. Curious, I approached her cautiously. Planning to make another report? I asked casually. She froze, then tried to cover her phone. I'm just checking the property, making sure everything is safe for the community. Of course, I said, smiling faintly. Feel free to inspect all you want, but perhaps I can join you next time. I wouldn't want you to misinterpret anything. Her eyes narrowed, and she walked away quickly, muttering. I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. The tables were slowly turning. The next day, I received a notice of another HOA meeting. This one was supposed to address community guidelines and discuss ongoing disputes. I knew Karen would use this as a platform to rally support against me. When I arrived, I saw that Karen had already prepared a presentation. Charts, bullet points, and even exaggerated images of the bridge were displayed on a projector. She began speaking to the assembled neighbors, recounting how I had supposedly defied the community and set a dangerous example. I watched, patiently, until Mrs. Patel whispered a reminder. It was time to act strategically. May I present? I asked calmly. The room quieted. Karen's face twisted with irritation. I connected my laptop to the projector and displayed the survey maps, permits, inspection approvals, and photos of the bridge. Everything you see here demonstrates that the bridge is fully compliant and on my property. The $350 fine issued by the HOA is unenforceable and baseless. Gasps and murmurs swept through the crowd. Karen was visibly flustered. She attempted to interject, but was quickly silenced by board members who glanced nervously at her. I continued to show letters, emails, and even a timeline of her repeated attempts to intimidate me. This isn't just about a bridge, I said, my voice steady. It's about ensuring that personal vendettas do not override the law. I built this bridge for safety, convenience, and as a continuation of a family legacy. It stands as an example of responsible ownership and respect for the law. Karen's lips quivered, her authority completely undermined in front of the very people she had hoped would support her. By the end of the meeting, the board issued a formal statement acknowledging that the bridge was legal and the fine was voided. Karen's face was pale, her posture slumped, but she refused to leave quietly. She whispered to Mr. Larkin, who seemed unsure whether to intervene or escape the situation. The following week, a subtle shift occurred in Briarwood Estates. Karen's patrols became less frequent, her letters ceased, and whispers about the bridge gradually turned from scandalous gossip to admiration for the homeowner who had stood his ground. Some neighbors even began approaching me privately, complimenting the bridge and offering support. Despite this temporary calm, I remained vigilant. I knew Karen's persistence and sense of entitlement would never allow her to stay defeated for long, and I was ready for her next move. Late one evening, I noticed a suspicious vehicle parked near the end of my driveway. Its headlights cut across the bridge, and I could just make out a figure taking photos from the street. Karen had returned, armed with her camera, her determination renewed. I took a deep breath, recalling Mrs. Patel's advice. Documentation was key. I quietly photographed her, ensuring I had evidence of harassment. Every move she made from now on would be captured. Over the next few days, the tension escalated quietly. Flyers appeared again, subtle accusations circulated through the HOA emails, and Karen attempted to rally a few new members to her cause. But I had strengthened my alliances. Neighbors had begun quietly siding with me, providing eyewitness accounts and confirming my compliance. Then came the morning when I received an unusual letter from the HOA. It was formal, almost frantic, requesting a meeting to reassess community guidelines in light of recent disputes. The tone suggested concern rather than authority. It was the first sign that the HOA recognized my growing influence. That evening, I walked across the bridge, the soft sound of the creek flowing beneath echoing like a quiet victory. The sun cast long shadows, illuminating the wooden planks and the handrails that had become symbols of my persistence. I knew Karen was watching from a distance, probably plotting her next move. And I smiled, because every action I took from here on out would be deliberate, every move calculated, every confrontation anticipated. Karen might have power in the HOA, but I had the law, the truth, and the quiet support of my neighbors. And Briarwood Estates was about to learn that standing your ground, calmly, legally, and strategically, was a far stronger force than petty authority, fear, or intimidation. The battle was far from over, but the bridge remained, unwavering, a testament to resilience, foresight, and quiet justice.